Hello, everyone. Welcome to the May 30th edition of the Gateway API Sync, today on an alternate time at 8:30 a.m. Pacific to be more friendly towards EU time zones. As usual, this meeting is governed under the Kubernetes Code of Conduct, boiling down to be nice to one another. So please do be nice to one another. And in general, as we move through the meeting, if you haven't been to one of these before, please use the raise your hand feature in Zoom as it helps us to organize conversations. We have a fair amount of agenda items, but if you have something else that you want to add, it's an open agenda. Please do feel free to drop something above triage underneath people's individual agenda items as we go. And I'll share my screen and we will go.
Can you paste the link to the agenda doc again?
I think Rob just did.
Yeah, I did.
Rob just did. Oh, thank you.
Can you see the agenda doc?
Yes.
Yeah, so the turnout here is pretty good. If you wouldn't mind putting your name or just something down in the attendees, we've been tracking and we are looking to hopefully eventually do like a regular EU-friendly time zone. Knowing how many people and what people are showing up helps us a little bit just to know better what we're doing. We appreciate it. Okay, so I have a couple of quick updates that I'll start with, and then I'll hand it off to Rob to talk about V071. We have a timeouts gap. Oh, yeah, no, timeouts gap. That is what I wanted to talk about. So the timeouts gap has had a couple of iterations. It is currently in provisional, but those who have been contributing to it are pretty much in the mood to move it to implementable now. I asked them to keep it in provisional just a little bit longer with the PR that merged on Friday, so that we could take a little bit of soak time, since this will affect probably everyone, and wanted to bring it up so that everybody just knows that we're at that stage. Next couple of weeks, probably, we're looking at moving it into implementable and actually like getting some gas in the tank. So please do check it out. It's 1742 and it's up on our website. I can post a link to it in, I think I did in the
Shane,
doc, but I can also drop it in the Zoom. What's up?
What PR merged? Because I think the big timeouts gap PR is still open. I'm agreeing with what you're saying. It should go to experimental off or implementable awfully soon.
Maybe it didn't merge.
I don't think
it
merged.
feels
I'm not
like
seeing it in the doc.
Yeah, it feels like a formality that it should merge or is about to merge. I can't remember the correct status,
I think maybe that was, I lost my head a little bit, but the idea is that it's getting pretty close. So I think you're right. I think I screwed up and I thought something merged, but it really hadn't. But we're getting pretty close. So please do check it out if you're interested. I feel like almost anybody who's implementing should be interested, maybe. And give it a look over, make sure everything kind of jives. And we really encourage people to come up with small PRs to tweak the document. We love to have people collaborate, join together, because we will almost always probably come up with a better solution if we collaborate up front than if we get it to a point where we've implemented and then the collaborators come in and we have to change things. So please do check that out here, GEP 1742.
Yeah, so Costin, the proposed APIs in the PR link, it is fairly straightforward. Yeah, 1997.
I think the key part here is that it is proposing to add fields to HTTP router.
Yeah, it will be one thing I should call out here. The last bit of feedback was that, or at least that I added, was that the original proposal had suggested that the lack of a timeout value meant no timeout. And unfortunately, like that's not backwards compatible because many implementations are already setting a timeout. So I think we're going to run into this pattern a lot where the lack of a value does not mean zero. It just is implementation specific. May just have to keep on using that as a pattern for lots of new APIs as we add them.
Yeah, anyway, I think a lot of things like this. I think a lot of things like this will be the absence of a configured value means that you should use the implementation wide default for value.
Which thankfully makes a lot of sense for most of these values too, right? So.
Yeah.
We're retaining a policy of like no breaking changes in Gateway API as well, like Kubernetes.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. Especially at least for APIs like this is HTTP route. It's already largely stable and no breaking changes there. I'd say for resources like TCP route that are still experimental, actually, that's a bad example. I can't see that one having a breaking change. I can't see many examples in Gateway API where we'd have a breaking change. You technically could in experimental, but yeah.
You technically could, but the generally, if we were going to make a breaking change, we would rev the API version as well. So we would have to have V1 Alpha 3, which the three of us are pretty who like have the final say are pretty reluctant to issue a new API version without a very, very, very good use case. And so, but we are 100% sticking to the Kubernetes API conventions and API changes docs that are available offline. Like, yes, absolutely, we are sticking to that as hard as possible. Yeah, so I think
I was sorry.
Yeah, that's you found the API for custom. Thank you. Yeah, so it adds a timeout stanza with 2 timeouts in it.
Yeah, sorry, I forgot that people were watching what I was doing. I figured out where I got my head wrong. Frank had originally asked to make this one move it to implementable, and I just asked him if we could give it a little bit more soak time. So that's where my head was. For some reason, I had thought it had merged, but it's just that we're not. When this merges, we won't be going straight to implementable, but it should be fairly shortly after that. So now is the time. Please do jump in. Pull request 1997 has a lot of new content, and then the GEP overall. Please do jump in and check it out. Go ahead, Costa.
So Costa, I see you. Yeah, you go first, Costa. I'll go.
Meta question here. How will be the process to roll this out? So let's say this merges, it will go into a API version. The CRDs will be rolled out at some point by each vendor or by implementation or by someone, and then users will start using them because they know that it's there. Or how do we kind of roll out this kind of changes in real life in production?
So
yeah, good question. All right, go ahead, Nick. You got it.
Do you mind if I? Yeah. So the way that we roll it out. So there's two parts to this question. Firstly, there's the how we roll this change into the API in a backwards compatible way. This is adding new fields with, as Rob said, defined behavior. Like these will be optional fields that'll have a defined behavior when they are not present. The defined behavior is that it's implementation specific, but it's still there's still a definition. That makes this a backwards compatible change. It is an additive change. There will be a new API, like the CRD will be changed as part of a bundle version. And so the bundle version will be version 8.0, 1.0, one of the bundle versions. And then, yes, as part, the users will know how to use it because we will mention it in the changelog for the release of the Kubernetes API. And then the implementations will need to pick up actually including this new field into their code and handling it. So when the same way as when we add any feature, like step 1, Gateway API has to add it, and then step 2, implementations have to support it. Obviously, because of the way that this is being added, it will be extended. It won't be a core feature. So there will be conformance tests for it, and it will be an optional feature that you can opt into. I would imagine that if we get really good support for this over time, then this is a good candidate for something that would be able to conceivably make its way from extended into core. However, that depends on core means every implementation has to do it. So if we have any implementations that can't, then it won't be able to move from extended into core.
Yeah, no, that's normal and expected. I was more practical. Let's say I'm a user, I write an HTTP route and I add this timeout, and I happen to deploy with Helm in some clusters that doesn't have this version route, like JK, for example. It's it's managed, it's automatically upgraded. I assume most vendors will have some automatic system to keep this in sync. So will the config be rejected? Now I think the validator will ignore the field, so it's fine. That's probably
I
the
think
first
we have
question.
pruning. We have pruning turned on, so the field will be dropped and it will not be stored.
Okay, so users who can just add it to the HTTP route, and then we have some tests to verify that if an older version is there, it will just be ignored and eventually be picked up when will it be picked up? I mean, is it dropped when it's written to etcd, or is just
Yes, it is dropped when it's written to.
Okay.
So unknown fields as of CRDs moving to V1, field pruning is enabled, which means that unknown fields are pruned and are never persisted to etcd. And so because it's never persisted to etcd, as far as API server is concerned, it's gone. If you try and apply that again, the same thing will happen until the CRD definition includes that field, at which time then it will be added, then it'll be persisted to storage. There's more complexity there around storage versions and a bunch of other stuff like that that I think Rob's going to talk about in just a minute.
Yeah, I think Costin's raising an important question, and something that we should be good at clarifying in our implementation guidelines. We're reaching a point where it will be very helpful for implementations to understand the bundle version of CRDs installed in the cluster. And when that bundle version is newer than they are aware of, so let's say Istio, an older version of Istio is running and a newer version of CRDs is installed, Istio should probably put out some kind of warning saying this version of Istio only supports, gateway V060, and I see that you have gateway 071. I don't know, whatever. Just there may be features in Gateway API that you are configuring that we don't see. That feels like kind of the fundamental thing we need to solve and find a way to communicate consistently throughout the API. And I think, Costin, that may have been where you were heading with this.
Yeah, no, I think we all know what what I'm talking about here. It's a practical things of the next 6 months, because it's going to be a bit messy for initially.
Yeah, you're right.
Okay, that's a good thought.
It feels like
any actions we want to.
I was going to say, that as an action, that last thing that Rob said, I kind of have a pending item I've had for a while to put some updates into the implementers guide. That understanding the bundle version of CRDs and recommending that people check the CRD version bundle on implementation startup is actually a good one for the thing. Making sure unknown fields are saved actually is a complete minefield that API machinery strongly recommend not doing. It has like weird artifacts if you do that, about round tripping and a bunch of other things. So it is strongly recommended that you don't. That's why you can't. That's why CRD version 1 pruning isn't enabled by default. So the unknown fields are never saved.
Isn't this a problem? Because later when the implementation and CRDs catch up, users will have applied a config that they have to reapply it. Will reapplying it actually change it?
Yes. So reapplying it will, once the CRD definition includes the field, reapplying it will change it. However, you can always check what is actually saved by by getting the config from the API server. The config that's saved in the API server will only show, the reason you do this is that the configs that's in the API server will show you only the fields that have been persisted to etcd. So you can always check what the current version is by getting the resource.
Okay, well, Helm doesn't do that. I mean, it's more, Helm apply.
I understand.
Forget about it. We need to document it very clearly. I mean, I thought that it's safe. Anyway, I think documentation needs to be written, because it's not just a first this kind of change, not last one. So we'll have this again and again.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, we have a couple of potential action items. One kind of a general thing to provide some something related to what Rob said about providing some, like, I'll say standard about how implementations should try to warn users about unknown fields, old CRD versions, etc., and then potentially updating the gap with more documentation about how this is going to affect people in the field. So for the first one, does anybody just want to go spin up an issue for that? Seems like it's fair enough to just kind of define what we talked about here as an issue and market documentation.
Yeah, I can do that.
Thank you. For the second one, Costin, are you in a position where you'd have some time to like make a PR to the GEP to kind of add some notion of like we need to have some sort of like documentation for how this works, even if it's just one paragraph about like how this is expected to work in the wild, because it sounds like that's what you were kind of getting at, right?
Actually, the issue for in general, and I don't think it's specific to this issue in any case. I mean, there's not, people will not look at the timeout to figure out. This is something that we should put kind of more central. Applies to any future change to the API. So.
Okay. Well, let's at least start with this one then, which seems relevant.
Okay. Yeah.
And oh, that's not the right person.
Just
Probably
a quick
there's too
question
many other-
though. Don't the gateway CRDs prune?
Yeah, we
unknown
were just
fields?
talking, they do.
Yeah.
They do. Yeah. So we expect this to not really be an issue, but there may be somewhere, Costin seems to be pointing at, it may be worth documenting somewhere how this could potentially confuse people who are on like older CRD versions or something. I'm not exactly sure. I was trying to see if we could come up with a decent action item, but I think at least starting with like warnings and stuff like that is a step in the right direction. I'm sure, Rob, you can kind of riff on that a little bit in the issue.
That might be allowing the unknown properties, which then can be breaking changes when you introduce fields, right? So
yeah. So
actually,
so we're not gonna. I don't want to. I'm very anti allowing, not pruning unknown fields, because it does open a bit of a Pandora's box. But I think that Costin's point about the fact that if your thing has fields that are unknown, you might need to reapply the object to have those fields take effect after a CRD upgrade. Is the sort of the key call out there? Sorry, I cut someone off.
I'd kind of like to see. I'm trying to think through a situation in which this would actually bite somebody, and it would be nice to see that written down just as an example of what exactly this concern is. Because if you haven't applied, if you've not applied, picking on timeouts, if you have not applied a version of the gateway CRDs that support timeouts, they should fail validation. And if you have applied it, then the Kube API server should persist it. So what am I missing here?
Next time we add a security related field.
Okay.
So go
ahead.
It depends on.
We have eaten up a lot of time on this one issue.
Yeah, I'd be perfectly happy to do this offline. Let's go off and do that.
Yeah. I think the key part there is it all depends on exactly how the validation works, and whether or not unknown fields will make you fail validation, which I don't know if they do by default. So if that doesn't happen, if that happens, then you can.
I think they do, is where I'm getting at, but yeah, let's take that offline.
I assigned myself to make sure that we follow up on this, so I will facilitate making sure that we follow up on this one way or another, unless somebody already does before me. All right, so yeah, no problem. The next thing is just a quick little blurb. Some of you may be interested in eBPF and developing and deploying eBPF programs to your Kubernetes nodes. We have an eBPF channel now, and we've been getting more traction than I think we expected to. We've had a lot of people, including some of the bigger names in like the eBPF ecosystem, like Bill Mulligan, Dan Finneran, and stuff like that have kind of showed up. Liz Rice has showed up, and we've had a couple of impromptu kind of fun Zooms where we haven't really done anything super serious, but we've talked about the general problems with this ecosystem today and what we might do to fix it. We are considering whether or not we would want an actual working group to work on some specific problems. And if you're interested, I just wanted to do a call out because I figured this is mostly a networking group. eBPF has a lot of roots in networking. Please do join us there. Our next meeting, I think, is next Monday, and it's kind of, like I said, a little bit relaxed and kind of laid back meeting. And from there, we'll probably decide if we're going to move forward. But the general purpose is to make the ecosystem for these kinds of programs better, because right now it's pretty rough for any of you who have spent any time in there. If there are no questions or hands up for that, then Rob, go ahead and talk about V071.
Cool. Yeah, we got a lot of cherry picks back to the release 07 branch, which will be 071 coming out either today or tomorrow, but awfully soon. Milestone is AMP-D. That just means we need to change log and to trigger release. With patch releases like this, we have not done release candidates. So I expect we're just going to go straight to 071. If you run into anything that feels like it's broken in 070, please let us know ASAP, because otherwise we'll keep on rolling with this 071 release this week at a minimum. Yeah, and with that, maybe I'll just keep on moving because I know we don't have that much time. Next up is a really big change. If there were one change to pay attention to in this entire meeting, it's this one. I'm biased, but I feel like this is something that could trip people up. This is really just keeping the ball rolling on a lot of changes to API versions. This is related to, again, version skew would become problematic here. In early days of this API, we said it is fine to just read and write from v1 alpha 2 because v1 alpha 2 is in the CRDs. That is no longer the case with this this PR, should it get in. What it will mean is that v1 alpha 2, while still served, is no longer served. So although it's present in the CRD definition for conversion, it is not actually served and accessible for anyone trying to use this. I'm hoping this doesn't come as too much of a surprise. Anyone using it in prior versions of the API for at least 6 months would have gotten a deprecated warning. So hopefully that's sufficient. And reference grant is kind of one step behind this, where it's moving to deprecated. And we're bumping, alpha is moving to deprecated, and we're bumping the storage version to beta. Yeah, hopefully this does not come as a surprise to anyone. But just make sure your implementations are reading and writing from beta as soon as possible, because this will be a big change. If you happen to be reading or writing from alpha, you will be very aware of it when you try and work with these CRDs. So yeah, that's all.
Probably the other thing to add to this is you need implementations or deployments of your implementation to migrate off of old storage versions. Just applying the CRD doesn't trigger this migration. So
yeah, and there's a tool for that.
Yeah,
I don't know how. I don't know if I've seen it been updated in a long time, but there is.
Oh, it hasn't been. It's
ancient.
So it's not needed for this specific change because the old versions are still in the CRD. We haven't actually removed API versions.
Right.
But when we do that, if we do that, that will become a very big deal. It's called Kube Storage Version Migrator. And basically what it does is any resource in your cluster that is using an old storage version is just touched like a no-op update just to use the latest storage version. Yeah, that will certainly be something like we should recommend if and when we fully remove alpha 1.
Indeed.
Is it literally just change the storage version somehow, or is it doing a get and then an apply?
It doesn't even I think it's a no-op. I think it's a patch with nothing in it. I forget exactly what it does.
You can do an empty patch. It's not recommended for all use cases. For this use case, it might make sense. Like in Knative, we use empty patches because we know the backing implementation is using the Kubernetes API versus like a some sort of like extension, but the storage migrator tool actually does a get and an update,
Yeah. Okay.
which is like really over the top.
Well,
but
it
it's
would
trying to
allow
handle
migrating
all
Red
the
Hook to run.
it's trying to handle all the Kubernetes use cases.
Oh, somebody's taking notes. Thanks. Yeah, so please do check that one out. I put it in the channel. That's 2069 is the poll number. Very important for everyone. And then in the future, be ready to migrate your stuff potentially, but not super soon. All right. Nick, you want to talk about different ways of handling multiple host names? Let's see what we're doing for time. We got 28 minutes.
This one should be pretty quick. So there is actually two ways that you can handle having a single gateway that has multiple host names and has HTTP routes that attach to those. You can name your rules. Name listeners, that should be listen name and then parent ref section name. And if you do that, then then the whole system will work. The HTTP routes pick a section, a listener name, and only attach to that listener. However, you can also have the same thing happen by putting a host name, a distinct host name on each listener, and then specifying the host name that you want to attach to in the HTTP route. This will work out the same because the HTTP route with a specified host name will only attach to the distinct listeners. However, if you did have a wildcard, it would also attach to the wildcard ones. And so that might be slightly unexpected. So I guess the thing I came across here was with working with some people from Cilium who were like, playing around with the API and getting config to work. They reached first up for using host names as discriminators rather than using section name and name. So it may be sort of that people will end up using that more often, in which case maybe we might need to just sort of make a couple of call outs in the doc somewhere to say, if you're doing it this way, that's okay, but there are a couple of other interactions that maybe might not be clear for you. It's not necessary. It's not, you can have a route attached to more than one listener.
Do we want to make the action now to go ahead and like at least put an issue out to make that clarification?
Yeah, could be. But I also wanted to check and see, does that
talk to people?
Yeah, does that I mean, it means that we've got two ways to configure the same thing, kind of. It's not you can use two different ways to configure the same thing, but they're not really the same thing at all in some senses. So I just wanted to sort of bring this up and say, hey, it kind of means we've tried to avoid heading down the Perl way of Tim Toady, and we should ideally we should have only one way to do things rather than having multiple ways to do things. But I think that in this case it's probably acceptable. But I just wanted to call it out and for people to think about it. And if you can think of things we shouldn't be doing or should be doing here, then it would be good to have someone else other than me aware of it. 14 out of 16 people just went and tried to search Perl Tim Toady. Yeah. Perl used to have a acronym that was like, "There's more than one way to do it," which if you write it down,
fact.
yeah,
Larry's thing, yeah.
And anyone who has tried to read Perl written by someone else can tell you that Tim Toady means that Perl is very idiosyncratic language, and it can be very difficult to read Perl written by someone else or even you 3 months ago.
It's actually particularly bad if you're trying to read Perl written by a Perl practitioner who's more advanced than you are.
Oh, yeah.
But it's hard for me to see why having two ways of doing this is, as a practical matter, it's hard for me to see how you could prevent that. It doesn't seem like a terrible thing in this case. And it does seem like having the documentation explicitly call out, hey, by the way, there's this interaction with wildcard hosts and host names. That seems like a great thing to point out very explicitly in the docs. I would tend to agree with you, by the way. I would think that people would I would think that people new to the API would be much more likely to look at multiple listeners with smaller cardinalities of host names rather than the section names up front.
Yeah. I guess this was also me trying to wear my Flynn hat for a bit and think about and fight for the users, as it were.
I'm gonna start passing out Flynn Lives stickers. Or
I was
something.
about to say, be careful. KubeCon Chicago, there's going to be Flynn hats.
That would not be a bad thing, dude.
Do them with like little Raspberry Pi boards or something, and like, I don't know, something. There's a project in this.
Yeah, there's a really nice project in there somewhere.
I want to self-congratulate myself for not rambling on about Perl as somebody who previously did Perl in production for many years during that conversation, and then actually kind of congratulate myself for something that I then just didn't do. So
No, that's nicely done. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, so docs issue. So Nick, you okay with just creating the docs issue? You have most of the context,
Sure.
it seems. Thank you.
Yep.
All right. I think we're doing okay on time. We got a couple issues left. Hopefully we're doing okay on time. I don't know if we'll make it to triage or not.
There's one or two on triage that I'd like to make it to as well. So yeah.
All right,
we'll
let's
see.
try.
Yeah.
Grant, session persistence API design questions. Is Grant here? Okay.
Yeah, I'll try to keep it pretty short, but generally I want to move on with session persistence. I chatted with Frop a little bit in the Slack channel, but I think what I'm looking for here is really trying to answer the questions of where do I start with this. So I think the big thing was I'm not really totally sure where session persistence should go into the API, and I think there's probably some debate that needs to be had there. So I think just generically asking, I could see it fitting in as a route filter, but I also could see it fitting in as a service extension. Maybe not, I'm not necessarily asking for the answer, even though if someone has the answer, please, feel free to tell me. But also what path do I take to answering those questions? Is there like some example gaps that I could look at that maybe kind of outline a similar scenario or what have you? Shane.
I'll start by saying, as a bag of worms, bag of cats. I appreciate you bringing it up in here though very much, because it can be. It's not so often that we remember to kind of go and actually ask the community, hey, I'm doing an implementation. What do you all think? Until we get to the PR level. So I like that you're doing it ahead of time. I think there's a lot of ways that you could go about trying to do it, including like organizing. I've done some things where I've just organized with a few people who are interested in like a separate Zoom and done some brainstorming. As far as prior art in the GEPs, I can't think of any off the top of my head. Can anybody else think of any?
Yeah, I mean, I think Candace has definitely had some experience with this, for better or for worse, with TLS from gateway to backend. I feel like we tried to do that every possible way we could think of. I would also highlight timeouts proposal. That is one where there's, both were also considered there as a timeout on a backend attached to a service, or is it at a route level? And what is in that gap PR, that's 1997. It just has alternatives considered. So it proposes one and then details the alternatives that were considered. I'd say that's really the standard. I haven't thought enough about this to say which should be the proposal and which should be the alternative considered. But I think both are pretty compelling in their own right. So I'll leave it there because I know we're short. Costin?
Yeah, since I've been working on this persistence session for a while and Tomcat, in Istio, I think that the biggest question is because there are 2 points of attachment. One is per service and the other one is per route. As a per route, it's slightly controversial because only if you implement only Envoy you can do it. I think we need to figure out if we want to do both, if we want to, if in case we add it per route, if we follow the timeout path where we add a top level field and it's not an extension, it's a core feature like timeout. And if we want to go with backend, we need to figure out what happens with that backend properties, attachment, whatever it was called. Is it moving forward? Is it the right place to place this kind of settings? Yeah.
Candice, you're up.
So Grant, I think your PR was, I'm sorry, your GEP listing all of the different implementations was pretty good. And if you go through that and pick the variety of implementations, you know, sort of try to weed, you know, prune it down to here's the 4 different manners of implementation that the current 4 different methods that the current implementations are using to do this, and the pros and cons of each. At least when people review the gap, they'll have some idea of what the pros and cons are of each, and you know, be able to use that as a talking point. That's just my advice.
Got it. Yeah, it's a good idea. I think the point here is that maybe I'm not gonna have the right answer right here and now, but maybe we can work through that in the gap with a couple of different alternatives.
Yeah,
Nick,
I was just going to say, for me, one of the things that has worked better in the past is when you're doing that little sort of, you want to do a slightly faster iteration than using the GitHub PR UI. Sometimes it is good to just make a discussion Google Doc, put some use cases, just get something down on the page that and maybe grant edit access to widely to sort of everyone in the SIG network mailing list or something, and just let people edit it or suggest strongly or something like that. But just get a Google Doc. It's much easier to do asynchronous, faster communication on a Google Doc because you don't need as many sort of backwards and forwards, and it's slightly easier to update. And so if you wanted to sort of do some initial brainstorming, I certainly recommend like having a Google Doc, even if you're going to do I would kind of recommend also saying, hey, I'm going to do a session where we talk through some of the things, and then you write the Google Doc in that session. That's also another good way to sort of really speed up the process of having this. Then you've got the synchronous high bandwidth communication of actually being in the call, and then the asynchronous thing for people who are not on the right time zone, who can catch up afterwards using the notes and sort of put some thoughts on the notes. Then when you come to doing the PR, it's you end up with you sort of cut the number of comments that you end up with on your PR substantially, hopefully.
Got it. Yeah, that's really good advice. Thanks.
Do you have everything that you need? Is there anything else that we can do for you right now that would help facilitate?
I think that's good for now. I had one more question, but Costin commented in the chat about it, and I think we can kind of take that question to one of those discussion forums.
Okay.
But one thing that will help is, the status of that backend binding or whatever. So are we moving forward with something like that? I mean, there is one proposal.
GEP 1282. So GEP 1282, which was the generalized backend properties. It has not been yet, but it will probably be declined in its current form. So the generalized backend properties was too big, too many options, too many things we could do. We might come back to it, but as in its current form, it will be declined.
Okay, good to know. So we are going the path of having smaller attachments like session property instead of a big bag. Okay, that's a good point.
But 1897
Yes, exactly.
about TLS is provisional, right? That one has been.
Yes.
That was been moving forward.
Yeah. So 1282 was the old one, the sort of all-inclusive one. That I don't think we've actually moved that to declined yet, but it's on my to-do list to move it to declined.
Okay, that clarifies that was my question effectively. That if we are okay, perfect.
Cool.
Yeah, I just haven't got around to that because it's a sad day and I need to summon up some emotional energy to go in and write down all the reasons why all that work is not going to happen.
Burn a little. All right. Grant, if you get stuck, make noise in Slack. Please don't hesitate to ping me personally, certainly, in the channel and whatnot.
Thanks.
All right. Yeah, no, thank you. Really appreciate it. All the effort you're putting in there. Lior, go ahead. Want to talk about HTTP route filter combinations?
Yeah, I think Nathan's had to go to a different meeting, but yeah, was just wanted to bring up, like, well, what are the thoughts for what kind of filters do we need to do all the HTTP route filter combinations, and in terms of conformance, like in terms of like implementation experience, like should we have like different constants for requiring those conformance combinations? So like I wanted to get some thoughts from the wider community, how they would like to.
Yeah, it is a good question. I wrote these as examples of options that you could use there. So for example, the core ones are really the only two core ones that exist right now. And so combining them seemed to make sense. Then combining core and some random extended ones seems to make sense. I mean, you could have every possible combination, but that feels, unsustainable to try and keep that up. My personal view is that since every extended filter would have its own feature in conformance, its own feature gate, as long as you flip that feature gate, you'll naturally get whatever tests, including combination tests, that are included there. So I think it's fine. I don't think we need any more feature gates. I am open to different combinations than what I suggested in the issue. They were just kind of randomly, written. But
so what do you mean about like so let's say I'm supporting URL rewrite. So if I'm flipping this feature gate, so I should also be able to support the URL rewrite with its combinations?
No, so when you support something like URL rewrite, that's an extended filter, you should be able to support it with core filters. So in the example here, request header modifier is a core filter. So yes, you should be able to support it in that combination. But there's no guarantee about you being able to support it with another extended filter unless you also have that feature gate flipped.
Though, like, do we really want tests for, like, let's say I have two extensions, like two feature gates enabled. So do we want tests to see whether one of the extended features is like working well with the other one, or because we could end up with endless amount of combinations?
Yeah, that's I think having a couple could be helpful. So I proposed one down there, but I think trying to have full coverage there is going to be impossible, or just not maintainable. So I
have ChatGPT do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You've just been waiting for the chance to use it, haven't you?
I was trying to hold back, not make the joke.
I'm not sure what's a more buzzword now, ChatGPT or eBPF.
Like that. Yeah. So just so we're clear though, what's the danger you're seeing with kind of trying to hit every combination? Rob, you're like, you see that as ending up being a maintenance hell?
Yeah, I mean, exponential number of combinations. Every new filter we have combined with every filter we might create in the future.
The alternative being we just pick some.
Yes, that's what this proposal is right now. It's just make sure every filter is combined with at least one other filter in a conformance test.
I mean, to make it more to make it more maintainable, I think maybe it's worth adding, let's say if I support URL rewrite, so in the URL rewrite filter to add as well to the same test file to add the combination with core. And if we want to support like extended plus extended, have separate files for it. But
100% agreed.
Yeah.
I think every test for extended filters should include them combining with the stuff that's in core, because core is always enabled. Whereas extended tested with other extended should only be done on a case-by-case basis when they when they're closely related, or they might have some weird behavior that we need to lock in. The correct way for the two to combine.
The only question remained is like if there is a plan to add some things to core in the future. So that
there's not an explicit plan. Yeah, there's not an explicit plan as of today. However, the hope is that over time, generally features will work their way towards core. So if everybody supports a particular extended filter, a filter that is extended as of today, then there is a case to be made that we move that into core because everybody supports it, and so making it core makes sense. If that was the case, I think this is just something that we'll need to keep in mind, that if we move filter support to core, that then means part of moving filter support to core is going back and touching all the extended filters and making sure that now part of moving it to core is that you need to sort of interoperate with all the extended filters in a conformance level.
Yeah, makes sense. Shane, we cannot hear you, or it's just me.
I hit mute because I thought I was muted, but it wasn't. Do you and Nathan then have what you need to move forward here? Like, do you got enough to kind of continue the motion? What can we do for you?
Yeah, nothing. Like, I'm not sure. Like, he leaves a few comments there that I'm not aware of them, but I think I'm able to take it with him.
Okay. Yep. And just catch up with us, and we can always sync again on this next Monday, depending on where you're at with it. Please do let us know.
Probably next Monday. It's not going to be in EMEA time, so we're both in London. So.
Roger that.
Like,
catch on Slack and stuff like that. But it sounds like the general.
You're gonna get the PR notifications.
Yep. Okay. Sounds good.
Awesome.
All right. I added a little one here at last week's sync. We talked about actually, if you're not involved in SIG multi-cluster, there was a discussion in SIG multi-cluster a few weeks ago at the last meeting that kind of related to Gateway API, in that there are a lot of people in the Gateway API community that I have become aware of are interested in multi-cluster, but are basically in a place where it's like the interest level doesn't match up with any strong impetus to basically go forth by themselves. So some of us in the Gateway API community, I think, that are interested, but none of us are going to go do it solo. There may be room, and the multi-cluster SIG is kind of open to the suggestion that if we had more people join SIG multi-cluster and help out, there may be more room for machinery there, basically to build that together in upstream. Things like potentially, but don't quote me, like an implementation of service import that was kind of an efficient implementation and a generalized one. Don't quote me on that, but like stuff like that was kind of something that we discussed. If you're interested, it's right after this and it's every 2 weeks. Just wanted to kind of generally invite people to that, as I understand a lot of Gateway API people are kind of interested. With that, I think you wanted to get to some specific triage items, Rob. Just start from the top.
Yeah, we actually have more time than I thought we would, so that's great. I actually just added some that, in this one in particular, the routability from Dave feels awfully close, and I just want to follow back up on that thread. One huge thank you to Dave for pushing this one through. This is one of our most commented GEPs ever, so our GEP PRs anyway. So thanks, Dave. I think this is nearly done, if not done. The one that was blocking it is was the infrastructure GEP, which I think is also merged as of today.
It should be.
Yeah. So this is unblocked and I think ready to go. So really, this is a final. Okay. Blocked by Prow. Okay. It seems like I've seen some strange issues on other PRs this morning. So
yeah, CI was losing its mind this morning.
Okay. So we'll merge soon whenever we figure out what's going on with underlying infra.
This PR is a book.
Yes, it is. Okay, so that's all I wanted to say. Like last hour or so for comments, and then I think this one merges. The issue Well, any comments on this before keep on going?
I'm
Okay,
updating
cool.
the Go doc to pull in the GEP stuff, so
Oh, great.
you have to do it anyways. So I might as
Yeah.
well just do it in the Markdown.
Yeah. Great. Then the next one is an issue that I don't know how I missed this, but it seems problematic. I don't have a solution. I haven't gotten that far, but when I saw this issue come in, I just, it's unfortunate, but we have a default without a default, I think. So TLS config mode is optional, but then we say when it's not set, we interpret it as terminate. I don't know. This just
that's
feels...
actually the third. That's actually the third one in the list. Yeah. But yes, cool, awesome.
Yeah. So if anyone has ideas on, I don't know if we can do anything in a backwards compatible way to change this. So I think we may just be stuck with just a documentation error here.
Yeah, well, I think we might just have to update the documentation to document what is actually the case, i.e., that in the absence of a mode, it's a little bit more subtle than what it says here. It's actually in the absence of a specific mode, it actually depends on the protocol. The selected protocol, both via the protocol field and the routes that bind to the listener. This is one of those things that we backwards and forwards on quite a lot of times, very early on, and then sort of left alone. So it's like for HTTP route, it defaults to terminate. For TLS route, for TLS protocol, it defaults to pass through, because that's what makes sense for the protocol, right? So it's not quite as simple as it defaults to terminate all the time.
Okay. We have limited time, so I think I will follow up with both of you asynchronously on this one, but I assigned myself to continue triaging it to get it to a point where we know exactly what we need to do.
Cool.
Yep.
Last one with a minute to spare.
Yeah, I just wanted to highlight this one. This is, I think, a pretty important set of conformance tests, and would love to get some reviews on it ASAP. I think this could catch some issues. So I appreciate this getting filed, and
with
heads up.
With the current set of conformance tests, it's possible for you to correctly program the status to reject, to say this secret is not valid, but to accidentally end up programming the data plane with the secret anyway, because we don't have anything in the conformance tests that validate that when a TLS secret, for example, or a backend has been rejected, that it actually is rejected and the traffic does not flow. So we actually need to have requests test that in the case that the reference grade is rejected, that you actually don't have any traffic flow as well.
Roger
Not
that.
just that the status is set. And that's actually probably a good thing for us to keep in mind for all of the sort of ones where we are currently checking a status, that we have a behavior test as well that check that not only is the status test, the status correct, but that the behavior is not happening for the negative tests.
Yes, indeed. All right. We are at time, and we kind of got through everything. So great. Thank you, everyone, for your time. We'll see you again next week at the usual time, and we will be looking for opportunities for maybe a regular EU friendly in the future. So keep a lookout for that. Cheers.
Thanks.